One, two. All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here at our first town hall that we've had in a better part of a decade. So I'm happy to everyone's here in person, and we got such good representation from all levels of government here, starting with Congresswoman Strickland, State Representative Barkis, and County Commissioner Chair Carolina Mejia, and myself as Mayor Joe DePinto. Why don't we all go ahead and start with the Pledge of Allegiance, and we'll get this thing started. All right. So if you have a question, if you want to ask anyone up here, you can have a question for all of us. You can have it individualized to any one of us. Just raise your hand, get a note card from Lynn, who's right over here. Wave her hand, Lynn, taking pictures and collecting cards. She'll be bringing them up. We already got some up here. We'll go through as many as we can, but we'll first allow a few minutes for each of the elected officials here to go ahead and introduce themselves. If they want to talk about what committees they're on and what they're working on, stuff like that, they can go ahead and do that. So why don't we take a minute and we'll start off with Congressman Strickland.
All right, well, thank you very much, Mayor, and thank you to you and your staff for helping arrange this. It's nice to be with you all in person. My name is Marilyn Strickland, and I proudly represent the 10th Congressional District of Washington State. And I wanted to be here tonight for a few reasons, namely to show you all that it is possible to have bipartisan cooperation at all levels of government, from the federal to the state to the county and to the city. And I want you all to consider me a strong partner as I work with these great representatives who serve you. I serve on the House Armed Services Committee because, as you all know, Joint Base Lewis McChord is smack dab in the middle of our district. I'm also the daughter of a veteran who fought in 2 wars. And it's very important to me that we take care of those who are serving and those who have served. In addition to that, we know that we are in a fast-growing region. So how are we going to manage that growth so that people can maintain the quality of life that they chose, but also understanding that there are more people choosing to live here? The past couple of years, as we all know, have been challenging for a lot of families, residents, and senior citizens. And we want to make sure that we are working together at all levels of government to do the best we can to serve you. Some people do not know that a congressional office in your district here primarily works on a couple different topics. Most of the calls that we get are about helping you navigate different agencies, whether it's the Veterans Administration, the Small Business Administration, the Internal Revenue Service, and often trying to get passports. We do a lot of work at what I call the meat and potatoes of government and not really making a lot of headlines with big issues, but that work is important to you. I was very proud to vote for a lot of bills in the last 2 years, including the American Rescue Plan that helped keep businesses afloat and got kids back in school. And the other thing that's important too is recognizing that when we do the work, we are trying to serve the American people. That's why you sent us to Washington, D.C. I was proud to vote recently for the Inflation Reduction Act, and the marquee policy win in that is that if you're on Medicare, your prescription drugs are lowering costs now, and you're not paying more than $35 a month for insulin. It's a very strong, solid start that will have a direct impact on your pocketbook. In addition to that, as a member of the House Armed Services Committee, I have been dedicating myself to working on military housing. Having grown up here in this region in Tacoma and watching it grow the way it has, we know that housing is at a premium right now. And because there's so much demand for housing, the prices are up. And I believe, along with all of my colleagues here, that every person at every stage of their life should have a place to live that is clean, habitable, and safe. And that's what we're trying to do. We also want to make sure that we are recognizing that we have a very large, growing senior population. My mother passed away in June, and I have been her caregiver for the past 5 years. And I can tell you that navigating the healthcare system and the caregiving system is hard, even for someone like me who knows how to work the system. And so as we talk about what we can do to support families, we must recognize that caring for our elders, the people who raised us, is going to be a very big challenge as we move on in the next few years. And then finally, I'm very proud to say that we're thrilled, first of all, that the Yelm Tornadoes, or the state high school football championship. As someone who grew up in Tacoma in Mount Tahoma High School, where we won two back-to-back 3A championships back in the day. I had to brag a little. But it's very exciting for a community. I know that you're building a new school and really just trying to find ways to adapt with growth and make sure that people can afford to live here. And then finally, I was really thrilled that the Hope for Heroes Horsemanship Center got a grant that they applied for through our community project. So they got $70,000 so we can continue to support the work that they're doing to use horse therapy to help people who are experiencing PTSD, whether they're active duty or retired. I'll stop right there. I'm very happy to be here tonight and look forward to interacting with you and answering questions. And I want to thank my colleagues for their public service. It's not easy right now, but we're here because we care deeply about this community. Thank you.
Thank you. Just put on line. Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. Andrew Barkis. I am your state representative representing the beautiful 2nd District. And I have had the honor and privilege of serving this district for almost 7 years now. I can't believe it. Next month will be 7 years. I currently serve in many capacities in my role as a state representative on two huge committees, especially this year. I am on the Housing Committee, which I've served on since pretty much day one, and I'm also the ranking member on the House Transportation Committee. Two topics that I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot tonight with regards to things that are affecting not only Yelm, but this entire region. My professional life, I have been in real estate and property management for almost 30 years with serving this entire region. And so I always say that having that experience both in the business of real estate, but really in small business, being able to bring that perspective to the legislature is crucial. When we consider legislation and all the different items that affect each and every one of us in our daily lives. And that has served me well as I have worked since I arrived there on one of the biggest issues the Congresswoman just touched on, and I'm sure we'll talk more, is housing. And I think this year, I truly believe that this is, it better be, this is the year of housing. I am just amazed at the amount of policy and the amount of work that we have been working in a bipartisan manner, more so than ever before. On bills that I have been trying to champion for a long, long time that will help in all facets of the housing ladder, as we like to say. Primarily, there's several that are being considered right now, and one you're going to hear about and maybe want to talk about. It's called the Missing Middle Bill, and it talks about how we look at zoning, how we look at removing barriers for the ability to build. The biggest thing that I've been working on within that is how do we get at lowering the cost, removing those barriers and burdens through the regulatory environment, and not creating more policy and more legislation that is counterintuitive to the work that we're doing today. We have to work together so that we look at everything in the universe of the legislature. If we do great housing policy and then we do another policy somewhere else that may not have the word housing in it, but will have a direct effect on the policy that we create, we're not making any strides to getting at the problem that's at hand. In transportation, well, it's been an interesting couple of years. And we saw last year for the first time really a not bipartisan. And it was, and as a result, it didn't come out as good as we had hoped as far as the budget and the transportation plan. And I'm happy to say that we worked past that and we're unified together. We're working together, the chair and I, Chair Fye, and the entire committee in the House of Representatives to make sure that we address the transportation needs now and in the future for the state of Washington. There are big concerns right now. We'll talk a little bit about some things that affect us right here in Yelm and some things that the Congressman and I have actually been working together on to try to address some very critical infrastructure issues in our region. And it is a time not to be pausing and stopping certain things, but really looking how we can get things done now. Because the longer it takes, the more it costs, the bigger the delays, and the bigger the issues and impacts on all of our communities. It is a myriad of different things. The legislature is a fast-paced, unbelievable environment, and being back for the first time in 2 years reminded me of that in the last 10 days. As you know, we've been virtual for the last 2 years. And so getting things done in that environment is really not how to do the people's business. The ability to have communication and talk and the conversations and all the work that we're doing, I think is reflective in the fact that we're starting out in this manner of really wanting to get things done together. You have to. If we don't, we just have a stalemate and we're not able to do that. I had a great conversation today with the mayor. He came and visited me at the Capitol, and we talked about a lot of things that we'll probably talk about tonight. But it is a unique year, a unique opportunity. And I know there's some big issues out there. There's some big issues that we're facing, not just in housing and transportation, but our homeless crisis, drug addiction, mental health, so many things, labor, workforce, you name it. All those issues are critical to this community and to this region. And I will continue to work on that with my colleagues in the House of Representatives and the Senate to hopefully be able to accomplish some great things. I'm joined tonight by my beautiful wife, Lisa. She's here supporting me tonight. My two boys are not. One's in Germany and one's in Germany in school, and the other is holding down the fort for the business. But we have been residents here in this community for a long, long time. And we love it here. I love representing it. It's an honor to do that, and I look forward to the conversation tonight.
Hello, I'm Carolina Mejia, and I am Thurston County Commissioner, and I am the chair this year. Before I get started, I wanted to recognize some county electeds that have joined us here tonight. First of all, Sheriff Derek Sanders over there in the back. And my two seatmates, Commissioner Ty Menser. And your very own commissioner for your district, Commissioner Gary Edwards. We couldn't get anything accomplished without the three of us. You always need a second vote, so I want to recognize them. So 2022 was a very busy year for the county. Each one of us has currently 19 committees. I won't go into what all those committees are, but I felt like we laid the foundation to a lot of policies and projects that we'll finally start seeing some fruition this year. The first big thing that you're going to see on your ballots this year is the addition of 2 new commissioners that the voters approved last November. So commissioners for District 4 and District 5 will be running this year, and you'll be seeing that in the general election as it comes in your ballots. So we're trying to set the governance of the board and how it's going to look like moving forward from 3 to 5. It's definitely going to change the dynamic, but we're all very excited to really get 2 new commissioners on board and finally start having those conversations that we haven't really been able to have. It's definitely an impediment when you can't sit down with another commissioner and just really have a conversation with them. So I think that's one of the aspects we're most excited about. The Board of County Commissioners and the federal government approved the county's habitat conservation plan. That's been ongoing for more than 10 years, and many of you are very familiar with this topic. So we're very excited that we have laid out the process for it, and building permits are going to start being issued in, I believe it's the end of this month. So we're very excited about that. It's definitely been a long process. It's affected a lot of our county residents. So that's one of the ways that we were able to work with the federal government to finally come to a resolution. General government has definitely changed its offices, and that means the assessor's office, treasurer's, auditor, community planning, economic development, and commissioner's office. We are now located at 3000 Pacific Avenue, and the old courthouse, or the main campus as it's known, is where your courts are still located, your prosecutor's office, public defense. So it's going to become a law and justice center. We wanted to do something that would address the immediate needs for spacing. I think that's one of the things we've heard. And so that was, it's a short-term solution to a very long-term issue that we've had for an ongoing number of years. The county's budget continues to be a challenge in balancing services to citizens. This year, we got a sticker shock when we got our risk management insurance, and it went up by $1.9 million. So we will continue to find ways to maintain a sustainable and responsible general government and have that general fund balance, healthy general fund balance. We will continue to work with the state legislator, not making an ask or anything, to find options to aid counties with funding opportunities. And overall, we're just very optimistic about 2023 and excited to really continue our work with our community partners and our stakeholders, and of course with you. So we're very thankful for Yelm for holding this. They've been excellent community partners with the county, and it's been an honor and a pleasure to work with your mayor, Joe DePinto.
Thank you. So for the city of Yelm, we've had a very busy last year. Some of the major accomplishments that the city has done, I would say is, well, actually, first of all, I did want to recognize a few other people that walked in and some of our local electeds as well, starting with Pierce County Council Commissioner or Council Member, where's she at? There she is, Amy Kruver over there. Thank you, Amy, for coming out here, Commissioner. Council Member, the counties are kind of weird. Some are anyway, and then we got our local elected officials here too. Councilmember Hess, thank you. Councilmember Brooks, Councilmember Kaminsky, Councilmember Smith, and I think that's everyone. Hopefully, and then of course our Yelm staff too, which we got a few over here as well. And again, Commissioner Gary Edwards, who represents this area. But besides that, we've had a busy year this last year, including achieving water rights, obtaining that. It's been a process for decades that started, and so I'm very grateful for those that started that process. The mayors, I think maybe Reva started that way back when, in the 2000s, and followed on by Harding and Foster, and now myself. So that was a huge accomplishment for us that we've achieved. Allows us to have the water that's available for all of our citizens in our city to grow for our infrastructure. We have a $33 million water treatment plant renovation of our water treatment plant. Huge project for us, one of our biggest projects for our city. Of course, as Representative Barkis spoke briefly about, was our bypass and the need to work with our state legislature. It's fully funded, but there's always shenanigans that they play sometimes up there. Not so much from Representative Barkis; he's been a huge advocate for it. But yeah, so we're still fighting for that, and hopefully we'll get that situated this year, and maybe by the end of the year, maybe we can start construction. But if not, probably next year is what it's looking like. So other than that, one other project, just briefly, I want to talk about is our activated alleyway, which is going to encourage a lot more businesses to spruce up their backs. It's going to be right behind, between City Hall, Yelm, some of those businesses, masonries, Whitehorse, around that alleyway. So it's going to make it more walkable for those folks. It's also going to be easier set up for our food trucks. So if we have some fun events there along that activated alleyway, it's a good project I'm looking forward to. And then lastly, we've been really working our criminal justice system here locally, what we can impact. As most of you saw, the catalytic converter thefts have been on the uprise lately, but we have, I was very happy with our police force that we're able to apprehend some of those suspects that have been around the city of Yelm. And so I'm very glad and thankful for our local police force in cooperation with other agencies, including Thurston County. Other than that, let's get right into some of these questions that you've had. And I'm just going to start with the city of Yelm because we don't have that many. Most of them are for the Congresswoman, for the state rep, and the commissioner. So do you support creating cities that cater more to pedestrians, cyclists, and public transit and personal use cars? I think they go hand in hand personally. The walkability is very important, especially for children going to schools and getting safely to schools. Lighting up these crosswalks, partnering with our schools to get more more traffic lights or stoplights for those pedestrians walking to school. I think that's very important. I think our activated alleyway is going to help out a lot to make it more pedestrian friendly. I don't want to negate the fact that, Yelm's fairly rural, and to get to our, a lot of folks travel to Olympia, Tacoma, Lacey, and other areas to go to work. So I do think it is important to make sure that those folks are um, still have the ability to travel as well. So yeah, I think both are very important, and I do support both. But absolutely, we're trying to make it more pedestrian friendly here in the city of Yelm, more sidewalks and safer routes to schools. Now we'll go into some other questions for other folks. I think this one, let's go. This one's labeled for Rep Barkis, so let's start with there. For Rep Barkis, please address transportation issues around Yelm, crowding, overuse, future plans for the state. Thanks.
Great. Well, good segue, because that question that you had plays right into a lot of the work that we've been doing. Last year's transportation package, called the Move Ahead Plan, addressed a lot of what you're talking about, because it's called active transportation. And within active transportation, you're taking into consideration all modes of transportation. I advocate, especially in a lot of the rural areas, that we need capacity, and we need to make sure that we can get people from point A to point B. And that is not always going to happen in these rural areas by riding a bus or being able to ride your bike to work if you work in Olympia, unless you're a really good bike rider. But there is a combination of these philosophies and things working together as we look at the budget. Safe Streets to Schools is a big program, and there's also what's now called the Complete Streets program. And this is where all these projects are looked at in a much broader scope to make sure that when we are developing streets, that we are taking into consideration the different modes of transportation, especially around safety. You're going to hear a lot about safety this year in the transportation budget, a lot about how we make sure that people are getting from point A to point B. In and around Yelm, the biggest issue is the Yelm bypass. When I first came to office in 2016, in 2017, I was told that that project was being advanced 2 years in the state budget. That's a Connecting Washington plan. It was a package that was put together in 2015, voted on and approved and funded. And so it was told, yeah, we're going to do this phase and we're going to move the next phase forward. Well, they completed the first one and then they stopped. And then over the last couple of years in the budget, we've had a lot of challenges in the budget due to a myriad of reasons, and then the pandemic hits, et cetera, et cetera. But it was still on track to be looked at until this last year, and it got delayed again. And there were some issues around, habitat, you name it, environmental, a ton of different things that came in. And when I asked the questions, I said, well, these were all issues that were taken into consideration. Well, the longer it takes and the more time, the rules change. And there are other things that we start to look at. And then those come into play and it delays the project. It's also a way of moving money around within the budget. And I, for one, try to prevent that. So I've advocated for that, but as a result, the project is still on the books. It is still funded, but now it's going to cost another $18 million. And I'm being told that it is delayed into the 25-27 biennium. That's not acceptable to me. I think that we have the land, we have the right-of-way, we have the plan, we have the money in the budget. We need to make sure this is going to happen. It is a bigger problem within the state transportation budget. A lot of people, I left committee to come here, were testifying on the governor's proposed budget. And there is a lot of concern because we're seeing projects throughout the state being delayed, postponed, pushed out into future years, and priorities shifted onto things that are brought up recently, projects, and not the ones that we committed to, voted on, and promised to the people years ago. So I'm going to work diligently in this cycle to see that that project gets back on track, back in the time frame in which it needs to be, and to make sure that we have the resources in order to complete that vital link.
Thank you, Representative Barkis. All right, this question's for the Congresswoman. Please speak about the approaching debt limit. What compromises do you foresee? What does it say about how the federal government will work on behalf of the citizens over the coming 2 years?
So the debt limit is not something that should be voted on by Congress. The people who are in charge of administrating finances for the US government at the federal level should have the authority to make sure that we pay our bills. And unfortunately, this is one of those things that's being weaponized. We have to pay our debt, we have to pay our bills. And threatening to hold Social Security hostage or Medicare hostage is unconscionable to me. So if that ever comes up as something, that is a complete non-starter for me.
Thank you, Congresswoman. All right, we got a question for the commissioner here. Farmland preservation is a major issue in Thurston County. What is his position on that? I think maybe if you could talk to maybe some of the programs the county partners with local agencies and stuff like that for farmland.
Yes. So we just updated, or we're going to have a public hearing coming up for our agricultural lands. And this was a code update that was way overdue. And one of the things that the commissioners did last year was we hired an agricultural program coordinator, I believe is her title, and she works with community planning and economic development. And we wanted her to look at farmlands and agriculture in Thurston County in two aspects, right? First is how we need to update our codes to help farmers, because we can have farmland, but if we don't have farmers to actually farm that, if land becomes too expensive, then we're losing a major economic driver in our economy. So updating our codes, that was the big part. We got through that docket process. It came through the Planning Commission. The commissioners set this for a public hearing. Do you know the date? Sarah's going to help me look up that date really quick for all of you if you're interested on it. But that's one of the major things we're doing. But we've also partnered with the Thurston County Pack Mountain Workforce Development Council, as well as WSU Extension, to start an agriculture sector recovery program. So we approved $500,000 out of ARPA to fund this program, and Thurston County farmers, where we saw that were really impacted by COVID-19, and they're experiencing labor shortages. So that's been the major thing we've heard from local farmers. We did a survey, and labor shortages was one of the number one thing they said they needed assistance with. So this will help us hopefully cover that gap. This program really focuses on recruiting and developing talent, subsidizing worker wages for employers. That was another thing we heard. Expanding knowledge of agriculture-related career pathways in the county. So that's some of the ways that we're trying to address this very complicated issue. I know it's something we've heard a lot about, but I think as a commission, we are all committed to preserving farmland in Thurston County.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. We got a few questions regarding the airport. Surprise, surprise. I basically asking for your stance on it. I think it's mainly for Representative Barkis, but just to let you know, from the local level, the commissioners sent a joint letter along with the mayors of the cities, which everyone signed on to, opposing locally here in Yelm and also Pierce County. Not for us, but obviously Pierce County folks are against it as well. But Representative Barkis, do you want to speak to that airport and what's going on?
Actually, if you don't mind, I'd like to start, then I'm going to hand
Sure.
it off to Representative Barkis.
Sure.
So back in 2019, there was a state senator who commissioned a study, Senator Karen Kaiser, who said that we probably need another airport in this metropolitan region. And when I talk about the metro region, this goes from Everett to Tumwater, this large metro region, what I call the I-5 corridor. Most regions in the country and in the world our size, they have two airports. And if you traveled through SeaTac recently, you know that that thing is stretched to the limit. Every centimeter of space in SeaTac is being used. And so when we talk about building a new airport, I ask myself, what problem are we trying to solve? We know that this is an international gateway, and a lot of people travel from here, whether they go to Portland, San Francisco, Chicago, New York, Singapore, Seoul, whatever. It's a busy airport. At the same time, is there enough domestic travel that could be done by high-speed rail, perhaps, to try and alleviate some of the traffic at SeaTac? We also have really large, important, growing ports. Washington State is the most trade-dependent state in the country. So we do a lot of exporting and importing, and those things are important because those jobs support a lot of people in our communities. And so when I think about this, I ask myself, what problem are we trying to solve? And because I am a transportation and infrastructure geek, I am a big fan of ultra high speed rail. So I ask myself, can that be one way to alleviate some of the challenges that we have with traffic? The other thing that's important too, I grew up in South Tacoma on Cedar Street. We are directly in the flight path of every C-17 that landed at McChord Air Force Base. So standing in my backyard, it looked like these planes were about to land on our big oak trees. So I understand the challenges and the worries and concerns about building an airport out here. The other thing that's important too, though, is that I serve on the House Armed Services Committee. Joint Base Lewis McChord is one of the largest military bases in the world, and we're responsible for the power projection platform in the Pacific. And without going into great detail, putting an airport for commercial or freight use at JBLM is something that is just not feasible at all. So I come back to this one point. What problem are we trying to solve? Are there other ways to solve it? Are there other modes of transportation? And of course, I always come back to, can we do high-speed rail instead? And will that ease some of the pressure if the high-speed rail goes from Vancouver, British Columbia, down through Portland, Oregon, and then connecting with other points of high-speed rail in America? Off to you, Andy. Did you crinkle it the high-speed rail?
Well, I do serve on the Ultra High Speed Ground Transportation Committee. I'm the opposition guy. Um, and the funny thing is, I chair the rail caucus, and I'm a total rail nerd, and I've ridden trains all over the country, and we went to Europe and rode high-speed rail. It is a phenomenal system in Europe, if you get a chance. I was convinced after writing that it's going to be damn near impossible to do here. I'm sorry. I'm sure. The problem is this. I mean, if we're sitting in a town hall right now concerned about siting of an airport, we'll have another town hall meeting when we decide about where that right of way for that high-speed rail is going to go. So I have been advocating as a strong supporter in the transportation budget. We already have a corridor called the Cascade Corridor, the Amtrak Cascades. It runs from Vancouver to Portland. And it has a capacity and capability with infrastructure improvements to be a higher speed form of ground transportation. And it's interconnected already with an ever-growing light rail system in the Puget Sound region, et cetera. Now let's talk about the airport. I have said publicly, I'll say it again so it is on the record because I don't know how many times I can say this. I am in opposition of the siting of an airport in the 2nd District, whether it's in the Thurston County area or in Pierce County. Those of you who believe that I might be in support of that, well, you're wrong. You know, when I first saw that come out, and 2 of the airports are sited in the 2nd District, and the 3rd one borders the 2nd District. And when you draw the circle around the 3rd one in Thurston County, it comes right up to the edge of where I live on Lake St. Clair. So it's more about being in opposition, I think, really to the Congresswoman's point. It's about solutions. It's one thing to say you're opposed to something, but it's more important to find a better way to do it. Now, this commission was put into place by the act of the legislature. I did vote yes for that bill. It's important. It's important that we take a look at the ever-growing region and how we are going to serve the transportation, cargo, and other needs of the state through our air transport system. SeaTac is growing, and it's out there. It's 25 years away, but we're approaching it faster than they thought. And so this commission was tasked with a very difficult task. They had to look at stuff. Unfortunately, the way the structure of this commission was laid out and the parameters by which they had to work, it narrowed it down to what were called greenfield sites. The other thing that complicated it is this whole commission was done during the pandemic, and they were not doing what we're doing tonight. There were no public hearings where people could come out and voice their opposition or support of such plans when taking into consideration where these might be sited. It did not happen. It happened in other forms, but it did not happen in this manner. It did not happen the way it happened up in Graham last Friday night. I apologize for not being there. I'm in session, and there's a lot of other things that are there. I apologize again. Thank you, Facebook. But in the context of what we're doing right now, let me tell you what's happening to resolve this. You did meet a good colleague of mine, Representative Tom Dent, and you also heard from Chair Fly. We all stand together on this to find a better way of doing this. A piece of legislation has been drafted. I have a rough draft on my desk. And that legislation is to reopen this process and take into consideration what we have heard and what should have been done in the beginning. There's so many things that come into play. JBLM, the siting, agricultural land, our tribes, the Nisqually watershed, on and on and on and on. We also have to take into consideration, like the Congresswoman said, a holistic approach to what is the future of transportation in Washington State. And it will be a combination of that. What is the airport of the future? This commission looked at it in a manner in which maybe you look at what went on in Colorado when they did the Denver airport. Well, in Colorado, they had the opportunity because 20 miles outside, they had parcels of land where they could acquire thousands and thousands of acres from about 5 different landholders and build a giant regional airport. We don't have that here in Washington State. In the Puget Sound region, we are bordered by the Puget Sound and the mountains. There's not a lot in between. But it is also a region, Portland, Vancouver, and Seattle. So I've asked a lot of questions. The first hearing we had in the Transportation Commission was on this issue, and the Transportation Committee was on this issue. And we asked questions about, is Portland going through the same thing? Are they reaching capacity? Are we taking into consideration what Vancouver is? What is the distance that people are willing to travel? Could we do something in Eastern Washington? What about Payne Field? What about these other areas? The piece of legislation that we hope to have bipartisan support and the Senate, which will be where the challenge will be, will open this back up, push it out several years, redefine the public comment, take into consideration the environmental aspects, all the things that were left out of the original task that this commission was put forth. But more importantly, look at the regional component in more of a holistic way, not just about citing a giant airport in some part of Washington State, especially in Puget Sound. So there's a lot of work to be done. And what I would encourage you to do is keep track of the Congresswoman's, sign up for the information, sign up for my information, also the commissioner's information, because we'll be tracking this together. We will be working with our tribal partners also, and hopefully be able to get this piece of legislation put together quickly. It is our hope either to drop it at the end of this week or the first of the week. We have a couple more meetings to do, and then be able to do that. And when you see that and you hear that there's a hearing, well, come on down to the Capitol and let people know what you think. Because I think this is a good solution to push this in the right direction and do what really should have been done when this was put forth a couple years ago. Now, lastly, you may say, well, why didn't we just do this 2 years ago when this piece of legislation was done? Well, as the Congresswoman knows, legislation is a complicated thing. And when you're going through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pieces of legislation, and it comes to in the form of a study and something that is looking at a bigger issue within a regional context, that's what happens. You take a look at this, you read it, and you look at it and say, yeah, this makes sense. We need to address this issue now and for the next many dozens of years. And so let's commission this to do exactly what they did. I just think that the process was flawed in a lot of ways. I don't fault the people who were tasked with doing it, but I believe that there is a better way, and we will be starting that process soon.
And I look forward to working with you on ultra high speed rail. We may have different opinions. I look forward to it.
We will do that.
All right. Our next question is regarding transportation here in Yelm. Basically, paraphrasing, if I-5 gets backed up and there's an accident, as we've seen recently, a few years back with the rail derailment, the train derailment, a lot of that traffic went through Yelm. There's only a couple, three ways over the Nisqually, or 2 ways over the Nisqually. Down south, I think there's 3 ways, but 2 of them are through Yelm, or go through Yelm on I-5, and then the other is the McKenna Bridge. One of the biggest things that I think is going to be impactful for us to move traffic is our roundabouts. I know that sounds kind of silly, and some people aren't fans of roundabouts, but they move traffic. If you take a look at on the Nisqually Reservation, for those folks that have been here for a while, you recall how backed up that was. We would be waiting for, probably almost a mile of backed up traffic trying to get into Yelm. And when they put those 2 roundabouts in, bam, that traffic is eliminated now. You don't have backups. Similarly, what they're doing here, hopefully the state level, we're going to get funding for that. It's already in, I don't know, Representative Barkis probably speak to this in a minute here. but there's about 3 roundabouts that are really going to help the city of Yelm. One, it's not in the city, it's in McKenna. I think that's going to be a huge impact for us at that bottleneck right in front of the elementary school. It's a big choke point where traffic backs up both ways, and especially if there's a huge event like on I-5 and all that traffic is diverted, that's going to help us move that traffic. The other one's going to be in front of the Arco station, or right by the Arco station, that 5 corners there. Or I guess it's still 5 corners, I think. And the other one's going to be a Walmart too. And in front of that, it's eventually going to be a roundabout. And hopefully that's going to, long-term plan is that's going to connect to, I think it's Vale Road or Bald Hills out, head towards Lake Lawrence. So eventually that'll connect as well, move traffic even more. So there's a lot, and then of course the bypass, the Yelm Loop as we're calling it, is going to help a lot of traffic. But there's also traffic priorities we're doing that we don't really talk too much about, and that's a southern bypass, which will part of it's already been built out, which you'll see you see by the medical plaza out towards those new housing developments. We're going to continue that on all the way to the highway, and that's going to really move traffic for those trying to get out to Rainier and south to Centralia, Chehalis, in that area. And Tenino, if Wayne was here, he'd make sure that Mayor Fournier make sure that I'd say that goes through Tenino. But Representative Barkis, perhaps you could talk to some of those. Yeah, that's a great idea, Commissioner. That sounds like a great idea, Commissioner. Please.
He's putting me. I'm on the transportation committees, and of course it's the one item where I was like, man, I didn't quite prepare for that. I apologize. So if you'll start and then let me brew a little bit and.
No worries. I know, and the reason I did, the county has worked extensively, and I know the commissioner and the other commissioners have worked through the Thurston Regional Planning Council on more of a regional plan, and you'll hear the word regional quite a bit. Everything is interconnected. We have seen this time and time again when we've had issues. The Congresswoman will talk because we have worked in conjunction partnership on the Nisqually Delta, the Nisqually Bridge. Many years ago, these plans were being put forth. We were looking at how can we move people better around here, especially if there was an issue on I-5. If you all remember, I grew up in Chehalis, so it floods quite a bit down there, and that freeway shuts down, and when it does, it's a huge problem. When we had the issue with the train derailment, it really became evident that, oh my gosh, if you've got that shut down for a significant period of time, you cannot move people around here. And there are only a couple bridge crossings. So first and foremost, we are working on the Nisqually River Bridge, and this has been a partnership both at a state and federal level. I was fortunate to be able to work and advocate for the appropriations in the last budget, in the previous budgets, but also in this recent plan to appropriate the money for the planning, the environmental studies, and get things moving. Now we have to look at the next phase of that. But when we look at not only the Nisqually River Bridge, we have to take into consideration the other elements. So what Joe's talking about is the roundabouts and some of the interconnectedness that we see here. By installing roundabouts at Highway 7, 702, the other areas, it will allow traffic to move, to flow much better when we have those situations. It's not a huge ask. I believe it's about 19 million. And the Congresswoman, when we were together, and also with Senator Cantwell, talking with the tribe and other partners, it became evident that we'll have some support to advocate to push that through. We don't want to wait on this. Again, this has a lot to do with the projects I've been talking about, delays. We can't wait on this. The Nisqually River Bridge is a critical piece of infrastructure, and the more that I got to know about that, going on the river with the tribe, with Willie Franks, it was quite a stormy day, but also really getting out there and taking a look at how this impact if we had an issue there. It's time that we address that, but there are steps that we can take. That's many years out. I mean, that's going to take a long time to get the funding and to do that construction project. But there are steps that we can take right now with some traffic mitigation and flow patterns and other things that we can put into play right now in working with the county and working with our partners to address this issue. And part of that is getting that bypass finished. So it is time that we make sure that these things happen.
Thank you. Yeah, that worked. That perfect. I was just like, okay, this is the Transportation Policy Board meetings are at 7 a.m. I am not a morning person, so it takes a little bit to sink in. And I'm looking at Brian because he's also on. He represents Yelm for that. So yeah, the I-5 Nisqually project has been definitely a priority for the county. It was on our main item on our legislative agenda last year, and so I want to thank Representative Barkis for really supporting us on that. And we're not taking the finger off the trigger. We are keeping it on our shared legislative agenda this year again. So it's still a priority, but it's not just the county's priority. It is all of our priorities. It's the cities. It's the Transportation Regional Policy Board has, we've been, or council, not board, has been in conversations about this, and that's an intersectionality between private and public sector. And so we've been discussing a lot about interconnectivity, how to use that federal infrastructure money that is coming down. And projects like these are definitely a priority for us because really whenever a tragedy strikes, these are the main areas that emergency services is deployed to. So, you know, the county is fully in support of and continues to be in support of projects that affect the I-5, you know, Nisqually area, just because of the flooding issues that we've also seen in the past, and we've seen it with Tacoma Power and the flooding that's occurred in these areas. So, trying to address just multiple of issues definitely is something that we will continue to work on.
Thank you, Commissioner. We're wrapping up. They'll stay after though. We've got only 10 minutes left. We're gonna have one last question, and then we'll stick around though if you want to ask and talk to them too. But the last question I think is a good one for all of us. Not so much for me because so I'll just ask. Do you anticipate any legislation being passed this session with a divided Congress? But I think it can go into what do you think, how do you work with both sides of the aisle? And just to let y'all know, Yelm's local government at this level of the city is nonpartisan, so we don't have necessarily Democrat Republicans deciding on big issues. But overall, just my observations as a staffer for the state, I've noticed that a lot of those vast, like 90% of the decisions and votes that they take, and I would assume so similarly in the federal level, is that 90% is they're all on the same page. They're all voting together. It's the 10% or probably even less that are contentious and politically divisive. But Congresswoman, do you want to start off with that? How do you work with the other side?
So for those of you who don't know me well, I come from local government. So I was a city council member and then I served as mayor of Tacoma for 2 terms. I'm a lifelong Democrat, but we run as nonpartisan in the city of Tacoma. So I have always been focused on what's the problem, how do we solve it? You get to the U.S. House of Representatives, it's a little different there. And I say that just because of the types of conversations and people who get all the airtime on TV. And when I think about the political spectrum, you have people on both ends of it. But most of us, whether we're Democrats or Republicans, are somewhere here for the most part. I serve on House Armed Services. I serve on Transportation and Infrastructure. Those are probably the 2 committees that have the most bipartisan support. When we passed the $1.7 trillion infrastructure bill, it's called the bipartisan infrastructure bill because there were things we had to put in there to get support across the board. When we pass our defense budget, that is a bipartisan effort. So it is absolutely possible to do things in a bipartisan way. I have led letters with my colleagues from across the aisle regarding housing for military families, regarding the Small Business Administration, a whole host of issues. So it is entirely possible. And what I say is this, I'm willing to work with anyone who wants to work with me if we're able to deliver something for the people that we represent. That's my philosophy. So it's possible. It's not always easy, but it can be done. And to be honest with you, I look to Washington State as one place where bipartisanship actually is successful and does good work for the people.
Great answer. It's a challenge. It is a tough. You know, I'm a Republican, proud of that, proud of my conservative values, but I also know that, as a congresswoman said, in order to get things done, you have to be willing to come into the middle. You have to be willing to set aside and give a little bit on certain things. You know, my reputation in the House of Representatives precedes me. I think from day one, I walked across the aisle literally and worked with Representative Kirby on the landlord-tenant bill. I think it was day one. I didn't know any better. He was sitting across the thing. I said, "Can I help you?" But you know, the thing is this: you'll see my name all over bills. I think this year I'm either sponsoring or co-sponsoring more bills. It's a Republican Democrat or Democrat Republican bill, and mainly in the arena of housing. I also think that Chair Fly, who is the chair of the Transportation Committee, who is a good friend of mine, who has become a really good friend of mine, and I think he and I have set the example in the legislature on how to do things and how to do things together and how to work through our differences and how to set ideologies aside. That's the big one. Ideologies creep into everything, and when they start to creep into policy, it makes it really, really difficult. And he and I have set that example, and that's why the transportation budget, except for last year, which was a little challenging, uh, passes almost unanimously every year off the floor of the House. Now, the appropriations budget, the big budget, the general fund budget, typically is a total partisan vote. The process is completely different. It's not done in a bipartisan way. It's done by the majority with very little input from the minority, and so consequently you have that type of thing. Now, don't get me wrong. Over the next 100 days, there will be some fun fights on the floor of the House. And there are issues that we are fundamentally, diametrically opposed to. And we will stand and fight and fight and fight. And I'm in the minority. There's 40 of us and there's 58 Democrats. But the funny thing is that most people don't realize is when you watch the legislation being passed, the vast majority goes off the floor of the House in Washington State unanimous or close to it. I mean, there's so much policy that we agree on, that we work on. So it's my goal to do that. And in the same way, I will work with anybody that wants to work on good policy and is willing to put the work into it, put the time into it, if it affects and it has a good outcome for the people of the state of Washington and for the people of the 2nd District.
Too, and I think this is true when Andy talks about some of the fights that we have and the arguments we have. You know, we are who we are politically, and when I go to work, it's like I will work with anyone who wants to work with me, but I'm not going to compromise my values, and I'm sure that holds the same true for you. But at the end of the day, we have to remember that we represent people, and I say even people who don't vote for me sometimes, but that's okay. Our job is to represent the entire district.
So for the county, our office are partisan, and so, but I feel the majority of the issues that we address are really nonpartisan. They're really human issues. Are your roads plowed? Are, is your toilet flushing? And is your water clean to drink? So the majority of the issues that the county is addressing is really day-to-day business. There's only a couple of issues. The Tenino sexually violent predator, as Commissioner Edwards just pointed out too, it's something we are all against, opposed to. But there are issues like that, issues that really affect everyone's day to day, everyone's livelihood. So, in those issues, you'll really see the board be united. If you ever go to a 2 p.m. meeting, you'll see that the majority of the issues that are being passed is a 3-0 vote, because again, they're issues that we're not fighting against. It's issues that really make your lives a little bit better, I would like to think.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Congresswoman and State Representative Barkis. Thank you all for attending this. Thanks for those who are listening or watching on the internet. This is our first town hall in years, so I was very pleasantly surprised that we got everyone here for their busy schedules. So this was amazing. Everyone here has a very busy schedule. So I'm just very grateful for everyone that showed up, as well as everyone here is showed up public. We'll try to do these a lot more. We'll do these more often, more consistently. And thank you all for being here. This concludes the town hall.